Joining me now, as he does every week, is best-selling author Douglas Murray. Douglas, it's hard to know where to start. So much has happened this week with President Donald Trump's executive orders, including pulling the US out of the UN Human Rights Council, cutting funding for UNRWA, and now this groundbreaking plan to rebuild Gaza. What do you make of it all? And is he serious about the US taking over Gaza, or is it a negotiation strategy?
Well, first of all, I mean, all of these presidential orders and directives are, I think, fantastic. The pulling the US out of the so-called UN Human Rights Council is a bare minimum thing. Anyone who's spent any time looking at or sitting through the Alice in Wonderland procedures at the UN Human Rights Council will realize that no self-respecting liberal democracy should have anything to do with it. Sort of place where North Korea denounces Australia for its treatment of women, and the Iranian regime talks about the importance of nuclear non-proliferation and all that sort of thing. It's an absolute fantasy land, and it's always been a farce, and I don't really see why America or any other self-respecting democracy should have anything much to do with it. As for the Gaza announcements this week, they certainly break the paradigm, don't they, Rita? The current thinking on Gaza, as far as there was any, was that having started another war against Israel in October 2023, just the latest of many wars that Hamas-run Gaza started against Israel since Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, that the main thinking was, well, after they've lost again, everyone should just pay more billions to rebuild Gaza and hand it back to the Palestinians of Gaza so that they can start another war in a few years' time when they've rearmed and made their leadership a bit much richer. And I didn't think that was a viable idea. I don't actually think very many international players thought it was a very viable idea, but it was sort of the only idea that anyone had on the table. Trump has said what is completely true, which is Gaza isn't especially livable these days. Viewers will remember that all of our taxpayer dollars and pounds and euros that were sent to Hamas-run Gaza were mainly used to buy luxury apartments for the Hamas leadership in Qatar. And also, of course, very importantly, to build the huge underground tunnel network in which the Hamas authorities could protect their rockets and make sure that they were as safe as possible. And of course, also then hold young Jewish babies and others captive. All of this they ruined the Gaza. And, in my view, Rita, there is a price to be paid. There always has been historically for starting wars again and again against your neighbors and then losing them. Hamas lost this war. It's in the final processes of losing it. And I think it's perfectly appropriate they should lose land. That's what always happens in war. And that's why you shouldn't start a war. And it's almost as if there's a lesson there, isn't there?
Indeed. It's also becoming increasingly clear that the Saudi-Israel peace deal is going to move ahead, and it's not going to be conditional on Palestinian statehood. That was the conventional wisdom for many years, that any Arab-Israeli normalization was conditional on Palestinian statehood. Trump turned that on its head during his first term. There seems to be continuing with that. And as for the plans to relocate the Gazans, Donald Trump has floated the idea of Egypt or Jordan taking in people from Gaza. But you have another idea, Douglas. You wrote in the New York Post that perhaps countries like Ireland and Canada and Pakistan and those who seem to say they care so much about the Palestinians, maybe they should step forward.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's perfectly obvious that Jordan and Egypt should take in large numbers of the population from Gaza, partly because, I mean, in Egypt's case, it has a historic responsibility over Gaza, a historic responsibility that it has ignored in recent decades. But they used to own and run the Gaza, and they should be really good at looking after much of the population of the benighted Strip. As for Jordan, it's pretty much a Palestinian state anyway. And Queen Rania has been very vocal about how much she cares about the Palestinians in the last 15 months. Didn't seem to care so much about the war that they started against Israel. But I think Queen Rania now has a fantastic opportunity. She has many, many palaces, Queen Rania of Jordan, and this is a great opportunity to relocate those benighted Gazans to some of her palaces. As for Ireland, Pakistan, Canada, and other countries, yes, if they care so much about the Palestinian people who keep on starting wars that they lose, then I think it's a great opportunity to take some of these people in very large numbers. And I'm sure that as I said in the New York Post, I'm sure that the Palestinians from Gaza will help their countries that receive them to boom in their own special and indeed traditional way.
I just wish you wouldn't give this sort of advice, because our government here in Australia is silly enough to actually take it.
Hmm.
We are one
Oh,
of
yeah.
the very few places, perhaps the only place in the world, that's taken thousands in from an area where you would have to suggest they cannot be vetted properly. You don't know if these people are sympathetic to Hamas or not. Now, let's talk about
Yeah.
the UK, where we are seeing some extraordinary polling numbers showing that Nigel Farage's reform is ahead now of the Tories in every major national poll. And reform is also ahead of Labor in the latest YouGov poll. Will Nigel Farage be the UK's Donald Trump? You could argue he's already achieved that with his role in Brexit, but can you see him as a future Prime Minister?
We'll see. I mean, it's a fascinating situation. Reform is really a very new political party, and it has already overtaken in the polls the most successful and oldest political party in the UK, the Conservative Party. It's an extraordinary set of events. I think there's a demonstration here of a number of things. The first is the inept manner in which the Labour Party is trying to govern the UK. They've done absolutely nothing to improve living standards or indeed Britain's reputation domestically or abroad since coming into office. It's inevitable that a lot of people notice that and would like a protest vote. The interesting thing for Nigel Farage and reform is whether they can be more than a protest vote. And that'll depend to a great extent on who Farage surrounds himself with as the party grows. It's a very important but perilous moment in politics when a party grows very fast like this. Because inevitably what needs to happen is there needs to be a big support structure around that party. But yes, there's, of course, 4 years, more than 4 years to go until an election has to be called in the UK. But it's exciting. I mean, yes, as you say, there's a sort of insurgency feel similar to that led to the election of Donald Trump. And I think people will be looking for anyone who can show how they can be better governed, because it's hard to see how they could be worse governed.
You wrote about the Labor boasting about Britain's soft power. Why, why are they doing that? What is there to be achieved by boasting about soft power? Surely if you have it, you don't need to be bragging about it.
Yes, that's one of the things I pointed out. If you go around saying, look at my soft power, hear me roar, it's a slightly embarrassing situation to be in. David Lammy, the great genius who is the British Foreign Secretary, has set up a soft power committee. I mean, as you know, Rita, there's no major issue that can't be improved by setting up a committee of third-rate quangocrats. And they're apparently looking into the importance of British soft power, which they think is underutilized. I think that countries, broadly speaking, talk about soft power when when their hard power has effectively wilted. And not only, as I pointed out, has Britain's hard power wilted, its soft power has wilted as well, because much of the money and foreign aid and much more that the British taxpayer doles around the globe doesn't actually go to sort of soft power initiatives, and it doesn't go to productions of Shakespeare plays in Swaziland. it goes to funding bananas sort of gender woo-woo stuff in South America, or looking into the prevalence of racism in Brazil. And I'm not kidding. Those are the sort of things that British foreign aid has gone to pay for in recent years. So yes, I don't think there's much that can be gained by David Lammy's initiative, if you can call it that. But I also think that it's very interesting to watch when countries, and this is another thing the Trump administration has been looking into with USAID, when countries end up splurging money around the globe, and the money they're splurging actually is on projects which to a significant extent are against the people who are funding the projects, you know you're in trouble. And that's to a great extent where British foreign aid funding goes. Sometimes it goes to countries with regions that are richer than regions of the United Kingdom. And I think that's ridiculous. So I wish that David Lammy would apply his hard thinking to somewhat harder question.
Douglas, one of the underreported reasons for Donald Trump's big win was his vow to clean up institutions like the FBI, to tackle the lawfare, the two-tier justice system we've spoken about so often on this program. And we got a further insight into just how deep-rooted these issues are with the revelations this week that the FBI had assigned more than 5,000 employees to January 6 investigations. There are only around 13,000 FBI agents, 38,000 FBI employees in total. Douglas, this goes further than the FBI. It's evident that Trump 2.0 bears only a passing resemblance to Trump 1.0. He is going scorched earth in cleaning up the bureaucracy, and it's seen really as a critical move to achieve every other objective.
I think that's right. I think that it's been striking in the opening days and now weeks of Trump 2.0 that there is a sort of seriousness of intent and also of carrying out that intent. You're right, Rita. I mean, there are institutions after institution in the US, as in all of our countries, that have become bloated, politicized, and much more. And it seems clear that Trump this time around is really not only intent on changing that, but seems to know how to do so. But revelations like this about the FBI, I mean, really should surprise no one. One of the reasons why Trump spoke in recent years to such an enormous number of the American people was they saw the way in which institutions had become politicized. Now, I mean, many of us don't want them to be politicized from any angle. But if a sort of Republican administration set thousands of FBI agents against their political opponents, it would be as objectionable as the Democrats doing that to Republicans. And, we know the number of people who were, thrown into jail for standing in Washington on January the 6th, and were not the people who did anything of the breaking in and so on. And this was, of course, an example of the Democrats seizing a gift that they felt was given to them, seizing that gift and just running with it and politicizing it. And, if that can stop and federal agencies can actually get down to doing their jobs, then anything could change. And the best thing about it is that if Donald Trump shows that that is possible in America, maybe even the Albanese government, the Starmer government and others, or whoever replaces them, might realize that it's possible in our countries too.
Absolutely. That permanent bureaucracy, unelected bureaucracy cannot be unaccountable. And I think finally in the US, we are seeing a small reckoning happening in that area. Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Great to see you as ever, Rita.